Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So today I'm really thrilled to welcome Jay Worthy to the podcast. So Jay is a former CEO turned life coach, a father of four and the host of the 28 Summers podcast, which is very similar in a way to this show's aims in that it helps encourage people to live more adventurously and courageously with their time. And I first met Jay when he very kindly invited me to go on his podcast, 28 Summers. And I enjoyed our conversation so much that we've stayed in touch since. And I just couldn't wait to get him come as a guest on this podcast because so much of his philosophy and outlook is in alignment with everything that we talk about on this show. And he's got some really inspiring adventures of his own. And I think one of the things when you're hosting a podcast is that you're often highlighting other people's adventures and stories, but you very rarely talk about your own in any great depth. But Jay's got a pretty impressive one. So actually, I thought it was a great chance to get him on the show and hear a little bit more about him and his background and what inspired him to start the podcast and his focus as well. So Jay, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining me.
Nikki, it's great to be here. I'm so excited and a little nervous to be on this side of the mic because it feels so much easier.
It's so different, isn't it? Yeah, I know.
When you're the one asking the question.
Back, you know that.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
is revenge time.
I know. I now feel your pain, but it's really exciting to be here. I'm really grateful for the opportunity, and I love the way you framed it up. One of the things that I love most about podcasting, which I've been doing, I guess, coming up on a year, is it's such a friendly, collaborative space. There's no I don't feel competition. I see another adventure podcast and I see a friend, a like-minded person, somebody who I can collaborate with. So I was so excited when I contacted you and you got back to me and came on as a guest on my show. So really happy to return the favor.
No, absolutely. And I completely agree with that sort of outlook as well. I think it is just like you said, often, when you start a podcast, it's because it's something that you feel passionate about and that you enjoy and that you want to share, and to find other people who've got similar passions and like you said, that are like-minded, I think only reaffirms the sort of, I guess, the work that you're doing, but also, you just tend to have great conversations too, which is awesome. So Hopefully this will be a good one as well. So I guess my first question, and I sort of alluded to it in the opening, was what inspired you? Where did the idea come from for 28 Summers? What inspired you to get started, and particularly with a podcast as well?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I should say that I'm a podcast fan. I've enjoyed podcasts for many years and always found them to be really valuable in my own kind of personal development. I had a big focus since probably early 2011, 2012 on self-development, professional, personal development. My career was really accelerating at that point, and I knew that I needed to take care of myself, my body and my mind, my well-being, in order to be a successful leader and ultimately CEO. So podcast was one of the vehicles that I used. So that is important context because it's why I came back to it. The opportunity to give something back, having taken so much from podcasts, was top of mind. But the inspiration came about just a little over 3 years ago. I was living in Chicago, and I was an executive in a $1 billion company, had a lot going on at work, really amazing lifestyle. Was frankly struggling a little bit psychologically and mentally. I had all of the external markers of success, the trappings, as they like to say. They're called trappings for a reason. And inside, I was kind of deeply unfulfilled, and I had a lot of guilt for that as well, because I love my wife, I love my kids, and I knew I was very fortunate to have the things that I had, but it didn't really make me totally fulfilled, and I was trying to find that. And so I was listening to a podcast. I was working out in my basement. It's a very American thing to do, but I was working out in my basement, and I had Tom Bilyeu's Impact Theory podcast on, and he was interviewing a guy called Jesse Itzler, who's a very successful author and entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur. And Jesse was talking about the fact that he had this kind of relentless energy for life. And Tom, the interviewer, said, well, where does that come from? Why are you so fixated on living every single moment? And Jesse's answer was it stopped me in my tracks mid-workout. He said, look, I just turned 50 and the average life expectancy of a male in the US is 78. So I've got 28 years to live. But actually it's worse than that. I've only got 28 summers left, 28 summers with my kids. That's all I've got left, potentially. And that just, it stopped me in my tracks. And I was like, wow. And he went on to talk about the fact that, he asked Tom, how often do you see your parents? And because they lived out of state, he said, oh, I see them once a year. Well, how old are they? He did the same maths. And he said, well, how long have you got left with them? And Tom said, I guess 7 years. He said, no, you haven't. You're going to see them 7 more times. If you're going to see them 7 more times, how are you going to spend the 7 occasions that you see them if they only live to life expectancy? And just this whole, it was like, it's kind of, it sounds a bit over manufactured and dramatic, but it genuinely was this kind of, everything stopped. And I was like, that's it. That's what I've been grappling with, is that I'm 41 years old. I've got this uber successful job. I have all the external trappings of success, but I'm not fulfilled. How am I going to spend the time that I have left? And what am I going to do? What am I going to fill my life with? And so that was just the epiphany moment for me. And actually, I went on a bit of a journey from there because we had a big leadership change at the company. I ended up being asked to step in as CEO, and that's a whole separate podcast about resilience and facing adversity, because it was incredibly difficult. But when I came back to the UK after that journey ended, I knew I wanted to launch a podcast. And so as soon as I decided that, it was easy to name it 28 Summers.
That's so interesting. I can't believe I've actually never asked you before about where the name came from either. I'm just like, God, how uncurious are you? But it's such a brilliant, it reminds me of a talk I attended at the Do Lectures a couple of years ago. And it was Al Humphreys, and he did something similar where he sort of counted back on a clock. That's part of his talk. And I just thought, yeah, I remember it having a sort of a similar resonance. I was just thinking, yeah, absolutely. That you, and I suppose it's a natural point of reflection at sort of midlife, much as I hate to call it that, and I'm definitely not there. But yeah, at this sort of stage in life where you do start to think, okay, so there is time if everything goes like you said according to how things are planned out, but actually, how do I maximize that? How do I make the most of it? How do I feel fulfilled as opposed to tick boxes? I think, which is a little bit like you're saying. So I guess having started the podcast, having launched it, what are the benefits? I mean, the benefits in a way you set out to achieve, but I guess what have been the sort of the unexpected benefits that you've come across as a result?
Well, I think one of the first things is that it holds me to account, which I really like. So I'm 43. I'm going to be 44 in a few months. And, the average life expectancy of a male in the UK is a bit higher than the US. Not so many fast food restaurants. But I'm still technically, if I live to life expectancy, I'm over halfway. Right. So it's keeping me honest because it's keeping me focused on that thought. I do have 4 kids, as you mentioned. So they do keep me young despite the white beard. But I like the fact that the podcast keeps me in that space, in that headspace, because it's so easy in life to be passionate about something, but allow it to drift off. And other things start to get in the way. And my own story, I was super adventurous as a kid. I grew up in Northwest Norfolk. We lived on a couple of Air Force bases, but we also lived in very rural areas by the coast, by rivers, by woodland areas. And I was constantly exploring, and all of that adventurous edge dissipated in my younger adult life when priorities, commitments, other things took over. And so I love the fact that the podcast, really keeps me focused on this determination to live an amazingly fulfilled life and not prioritize always other people, but really make sure that I do carve out time for myself and understand that that's not a selfish thing to do. So I think that's one of the biggest things. I would say the other, it's probably silly to call it unexpected, but in a way it was unexpected, is I really feel like I found my tribe. I feel like I just constantly end up having conversations and getting connected to people that I just can't imagine not speaking to again. And that's a lovely feeling. Like the first time we met, I knew that we were going to keep talking. And there have been literally dozens of those since I started the podcast where I think, I can't imagine never speaking to them again. They've been so influential in my life already in terms of the conversation. So that's a really nice, I guess, unexpected byproduct.
So interesting. I mean, both of those points, I think, are fascinating. I've never heard, I don't think anyone talk about it, holding them to account in that way and keeping the focus. But I think that's so true. Like you said, it's sort of, if you have a podcast and you're talking about these things which you know are important, it also reminds you to live in that way. Yeah. I think too. And I think that's, however you express it, whether it's social media, blogs, or, putting something out there in the public space that says something about who you are and who you want to be, is a great way then of helping you to be that person too. Right. But I never reflected on it quite in that way. So thank you for that.
That's all right.
And I think your point about that sort of that community, I mean, I think one of the really interesting, I've seen it quite a lot recently on sort of various forums about podcasting, and people go, how do you monetize this? How do you get this many listeners or whatever? And I think what you just said reflects so much to me about, my own experience of podcasting, that actually it's the richness in those conversations and connections. That's the bit that stays with you and that keeps you coming back, but also that, I guess, like you said, reinforces the first point in a way as well about that holding to account. So that's sort of the sense of purpose behind it potentially as well. And I guess it depends why you set it up in the first place. But I think, it's really interesting how you don't expect it, but that becomes a really important part.
Yeah, for sure. I should apologize. My neighbour's having some building work doing, so you can probably hear all the banging. But that's one of the things that's outside of our control.
No, absolutely.
I do completely agree with that. And quite early on in my podcasting journey, I found myself getting pulled into the rabbit hole of how many downloads, are people listening? What if I'm talking to nobody? And I actually realized that it doesn't really matter, because even if I was the only person who listened, then there's a conversation happening which is adding value to me. And actually, in reality, I knew that there was more than just me listening, because I could see those numbers. And then I'm a firm believer in the universe kind of supporting you on these journeys if you're open to them. And the moments when my motivation levels started to dip and I started to think, why am I doing this? Are people really listening? Genuinely, every single time that's happened to me, I've got a message the next day from somebody on Instagram saying, oh my God, this is amazing. These conversations are so powerful and I just desperately needed them right now. And that is all the motivation and fuel you need to just keep on going, because you're doing something that's worthwhile.
No, that's so true. And I think, because I know obviously your format's very much, you speak to other people about their adventures and the things that they've done. But I'm also really conscious that you've got your own adventures planned for this year, and some quite big ones as well. So I'm not going to say any more than that, because I think it's probably much better coming for you. But I just wondered, what's your motivation for the adventures you've set up this year? And I guess, where did the idea come from for that as well?
Yeah. So what's the motivation? I guess it's probably, I don't know, like the nexus of three or four, probably four things, right? Now, I think, first of all, because of the age conversation we had before, and because I'd kind of let myself get a little bit kind of out of shape and unhealthy when I was in my kind of mid to late 30s, I made a commitment to myself, I'm going to be fitter at 50 than 30. So partly it's that, because I'm coming up on 44 and I've got to make sure I continue to push myself. But I think partly it's, I like to push my limits, and we talked a little bit about this when you came on my podcast, but I believe very strongly in the idea of pushing your limits. I've got a T.S. Eliot quote on my website, which I absolutely love, which is, if you're not in over your head, how do you know how tall you are? And I really love that, because I think it speaks to this idea that if we live within our comfort zone, it's hard to grow, right? And I want to be better. I'm a work in progress, so I like to push myself. So it's partly that. Definitely a huge part is about raising money for two really important charities, which I can talk about in a moment. And then the last one is, we already touched on it, is just this idea of living the brand, right? If I believe so strongly in this kind of mindset and this lifestyle, I think it's important that I demonstrate it, not just to people in the 28 Summers community, but to my children as well. There's no good me talking about all of this all the time if I then, sit and just watch Netflix every night and never step out of my comfort zone. So it's kind of those four things all meshed into one.
So tell us a bit more about, I think you've called it Project Adventure. So what does it involve? What are you going to be doing over the next year?
Yeah, I probably don't win any awards for imagination on that one, but equally it was kind of deliberately simple because it's a project about making sure that adventure is a priority in my life because it's important to me, because it was so kind of suppressed for so long in my life. And then when it came back, it brought me so much joy. I want it to be front of mind for me. So that's why I called it Project Adventure. It's 4 challenges, all self-propelled. The first one is actually in 8 days. So no pressure on me. And that is an attempt to do 10 summits of Penny Fan in 24 hours. So there's a race that happens every year that a couple in the UK set up to raise money for one of their unwell children, and it's called Tenny Fan. And I couldn't do it when the event was on, but I wanted to do it, so I made a donation to them, and I'm now doing it on my own, starting at about 8 a.m. And I'll be going 10 times up and down Penny Fan, which notionally is the height of Everest. I say notionally because you start at 440 meters and you finish at 886. So it's clearly nothing like Everest. But also I think this notion of everybody having their own Everest is quite interesting as well, that you don't have to go and climb Everest to have an amazing challenge. And then the second one is Exuma Islands. So I'm going with a company called Rat Race, which are kind of friends of my show, to the Exuma Islands. And it's a 280 kilometer chain of islands, and we're sea kayaking all the way from one end to the other, camping on the beaches on the way, which is without a shadow of a doubt the biggest adventure I will have ever had, and it's going to be an amazing experience. Then in July, some friends and I are doing a world record kayak attempt. So we're kayaking from the navigable Thames, so from Lechlade to Teddington Lock, which is about 210 kilometers. And we're going to try and break the world record, which would mean we're going to have to get in under 72 hours. So it's going to be pretty aggressive. And then the last one, ironically, is one of the ones I'm probably most excited about, is a source to sea effort. So challenge 4 is going to be in August. And this is completely what they call unsupported, right? So self-supported, where you can have food drops ahead and you can pick them up on the way, but unsupported is you carry everything with you from the start to the finish. And it's the full length of the Thames, not just the navigable length. So it starts up in Kemble and ends at the Thames Barrier. And so it's a combination of running and kayaking. So I'll have a backpack, which is just here, and to my side, and it has the inflatable kayak in it. And then so I kind of walk for a period of time, then take the kayak out, blow it up, and then paddle down the river, and then keep cycling through all the way down to the end. I have no idea how long that's going to take me.
Oh my goodness. I was just thinking, gosh, any one of those on their own would be a massive adventure and probably be like, yeah, I've done my adventure for the year at least, if not my lifetime. But I mean, to do 4 in a year is pretty immense. Out of all of those, I mean, is there one that makes you that feels the furthest outside of your comfort zone, where you go, actually, that's the one I'm least sure that this is going to go the way I hope so?
Yeah, definitely the last one. Deliberately put last because of that fact. And the reason is almost everything. I've done, ultra marathons before. I was fortunate to be part of a team that broke the world record for the longest game of rugby union in 2013. We did another attempt in 2017. And so I've done some pretty extreme challenges. But one thing that's consistent all the way through is I've never been alone. I've always been with somebody else. And one of the things that I really reflected on last year as I was planning these challenges was that I get a lot of my power and my resilience and my grit and my determination from helping others. So, it was kind of important to be honest with myself and say that, if you and I were racing together, doing something intense, I would get quite a lot of my energy from helping you, even if you don't necessarily need it, the banter, but also when people do have those dark moments, just getting my arm around them and saying, we can do this together. And so I think it's a really interesting challenge to me. I have no idea how I'm going to cope, just me on my own. And people have come to me and said, oh, would you like me to come and run a leg with you on that challenge? And I've said, actually on this one, no, thank you, because I really want to see, what happens to me over 300 kilometers on my own. I've got to pace myself. I've got to get myself through the dark points. I've got nobody to pick me up. I've got to get through the tantrums. I've still got to set up camp. I've still got to get water. I've still got to feed myself, then pack up, blow that kayak up again. I don't know how I'm going to fare with that. So yeah, that's massively out of my comfort zone.
That's really interesting, isn't it? And I love, that point you make, that it's not necessarily that it's the hardest, although it sounds pretty challenging, quite frankly. And yes, I would definitely need some help if I was to do it with you. But that thing of actually the challenge in the solitude or the self-reliance or whatever, however you term it, that actually that's the bit that's outside of your comfort zone rather than necessarily the physical enormity, although I'm sure that that's a big part of it. And I think it really goes
you're
back.
Right, because oh, sorry, I was going to say you're right,
carry
because from a physicality perspective, I'll probably walk most of the sections where I'm on foot, because there's quite a lot of gear to carry, particularly at the start. It'll be walk, run, but it'll be very slow. The paddling's pretty slow. It's not high heart rate stuff. There's no, clearly no elevation to deal with. So I think from a physical perspective, it's about endurance rather than kind of intensity. But the solitude and being alone with your thoughts, that's something that I'm fascinated by, and I'm curious to know how I handle that.
No, definitely. Well, yeah, there you go. You can come back on the podcast after you've done it and let us know how you get on as well. But yeah, I was just going to say it's therapy. That you'll have to go to another podcast for that. Sorry. I think the point I was just going to make very briefly was that thing of, we talk about getting outside of your comfort zones a lot when it comes to adventure, but often the comfort zone isn't necessarily what we assume it will be. It's not necessarily the thing that other people will assume it will be as well. We hear of people doing ultra marathons and you think it's the distance, or gosh, I couldn't run for that long, and that side of things. Whereas actually, I think your point that you make is that actually for all of us, that comfort zone is very different, and what our triggers are for feeling uncomfortable are very different. And that's what makes, like you said, the sort of the idea of a personal Everest so interesting, because actually, even if you were scaling Everest, that experience would be very different from one person to the next, depending on what it is that I guess not necessarily scares you most, but makes you feel less in control, I suppose, as well. So I guess I'm going to ask you, because I've sort of asked you what's next in a way, but what I'm really interested in now is the question that I ask every one of my guests who come on, which is, there'll be people listening to this, like I said, who see, okay, so one of those adventures is a huge challenge in itself. And actually for me, just getting out the front door and putting on my trainers, that feels pretty immense right now. But if you had one piece of advice for someone who's listening to this and thinks, I'd really like to get started on my own adventure, no matter what the size, what would that be?
I am going to find it really difficult to give just one piece of advice. I think top of the list for me is always, and I ask my guests this as well, so I've got the benefit of tons of insight from my guests. But the one that comes up I've had some coaching, but the the one that comes up time and time again from everybody, and I believe, fundamentally, is surround yourself with people who are supportive. Find your tribe is another way that people like to say it, and I think that is so powerful, because one of the realities that I've come to see in life is that when you tell people that you're going to do something different, something that you wouldn't normally have done, something that they wouldn't expect you to do, a lot of people's kind of basic human instinct is to project their fears onto you and tell you all the reasons why it's a bad idea. I don't think they mean to. I don't think there's any malice in it. But I think quite often people, oh, that sounds scary or dangerous or expensive or difficult, or how will you get time off work? When you find your tribe, they tend to take a much more positive approach, and, oh, that's awesome, you should speak to so-and-so because they did something similar last year, or how are you thinking about fueling, and have you tried this product because it's fantastic. And I just think it's a much more positive place to start from. So it's hard enough picking a challenge that takes you out of your comfort zone. It's hard enough doing the training and actually then taking it on, to also be surrounded by naysayers. So surround yourself with positive people, and then listen and learn. I think that's probably number one. Outside of that, I do also think that building habits into your daily kind of rituals is really important as well. Like, it's easy to kind of bite off a big challenge and then keep putting off the inevitable. And I'm just about, on my podcast in May, I'm just launching a new series, a bit of a plug, but I'm sure you don't mind. But I'm
go
launching
for
a new series called the Everyday Adventurous series, where I'm taking, air quotes, normal people who are doing things like this. They're just trying new challenges. And I'm talking to them on a frequent basis to make sure that they're preparing in the right way and they're getting their headspace right. So I think that's another big one is make sure that you respect the process and the challenge and build out a plan. And the plan may tweak and change over time, but ultimately being really thoughtful about a plan is a good way to approach a big challenge.
No, absolutely. And like you said, it makes it feel possible as well. Like you said, when rather than seeing as a great, huge sort of daunting lump in front of you, for want of a better word, it's like, okay, well, what's the next step? What's the next one I can take? Jay, that's been so amazing. I literally could have kept going for hours on this, but conscious that I'm restricted to my sort of 30-minute limit, I am going to bring it to a close. But if people want to find out more about you, the podcast, your challenges, where can they go?
Well, I'm most active on Instagram at One Day Adventurer, the number one. That's my kind of personal Instagram. I do have Instagram for the podcast, is at 28_summers. But to be honest, the best place to find everything about me, the challenges, I'm raising money for Mind mental health charity, and also Scotty's Little Soldiers, the charity for bereaved forces children. My blog and a bit more about my story is on 28summers.com.
Amazing. And we'll pop all those links in the show notes as well, so everyone can find you really easily. Thank you so much again for coming on. It's been absolutely wonderful to speak to you again and be in control this time, which is also awesome, I'd just like to say. So I'm going to let you go and put you out your misery.
Revenge is sweet, right?
Absolutely.
But, it's been a real pleasure. I was really excited to be asked and enjoyed chatting to you today. So thanks, Nikki.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And genuinely, I mean it. Once you've got through all those challenges, please do come back on and tell us all about it too.
Yeah, sounds good. I'd love to.
Awesome. Best of luck with it. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Nikki.
So I really hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jay. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for all the love you have shown for the start of season 3. It's been so wonderful to get your messages and your comments about the episode with Leslie. So I can't thank you for enough. And just to reiterate what a difference it does make to receive those, because often, like I said, as a podcaster, you are putting your stuff out there with no expectation of return. So it's a really lovely surprise and definitely has given me a lot of fuel going forward as well. So huge thank you for that. So what I wanted to do this week was pick up on the discussion that Jay and I had around your personal Everest, about that point that everybody's comfort zone looks different, and that what might be challenging about a new project or an adventure for one person can look very different for another. And I think it's really important and actually sits very much at the heart of the idea of this podcast, the Everyday Adventure podcast, because what it does is it means that adventure in the end is accessible to everyone, that you don't need to scale a mountain, you don't need to, and actually sometimes doing those sort of things can be a way of escaping, can be a way of not dealing with the thing that makes you really uncomfortable. And so often we can compare our challenges or our adventures or the way we live our lives with other people's, and for many of us we can often be left feeling that what we're doing isn't quite enough. But actually, if we look at it through the lens that actually the comfort zone that we are expanding in isn't necessarily the overt one, it's not necessarily what people see on the surface. It's not the picture that we put on Instagram. It might be the comment that we put underneath. It might be that stretch that we have, whether it is, as Jay mentioned, whether for you it is about spending time on your own and taking on a challenge that means that you're not reliant on other people or can't rely on people, or whether on the other side for some people it'd be not doing that activity or that adventure on your own, that would be reaching out and including others and telling others about it and inviting them into your world. That will feel different for everyone depending on, you know, where our norm is, where we tend to sit and feel comfortable. And it's that psychological stretching of what we feel that we can handle, but what we can feel that we can manage. That is where the magic sits in the end. So what I'd really like you to do is this week just encourage you to think about what stretches you psychologically as much as what would stretch you from maybe a physical point of view, or stretch you, you know, in terms of time or energy, whatever it is. It's just thinking, actually, what is the thing that really makes me feel, okay, that's something I would find really difficult. And then not necessarily having to set yourself a massive challenge around that, but thinking, what are the small steps that I could take to maybe try to test that theory, test that hypothesis that this is something that is too much, that's something that I can't do. What would be nibbling at the edges of your comfort zone for that? So once again, thank you so much for joining me. It's absolutely been wonderful to have you here. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to reach out, comment, let me know how you found it, please do get in touch. I'm on Instagram, Resilience at Work. You can contact me via my website, which is resiliencework.co.uk, or you can find me on LinkedIn and connect with me there at Nikki Bass. So otherwise, I will be back again next week with another incredible everyday adventure to share with you. And I really hope you can join me then. Speak to you soon. Take care. Bye.